So, welcome everyone to this short series about unlocking local action, where we're going to explore different ways of engaging local communities in climate action. My name is Rick Casali, and I'm a trustee at Carbon Copy. A few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. This chat's being recorded, and you'll be able to watch it on catch up. You just go to carboncopy.eco, that's .eco. Also, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A, and feel free to type in your questions. And I'll do my best to try and ask as many as I can, given the time permitting. So I am delighted today to have Grant Peisley as my guest. Welcome, Grant.
Thank you.
For the next half hour, we're going to be discussing, mainly hearing from Grant about the power of community energy schemes in bringing people together. But I think before we get started, Grant, I want to introduce you properly. And I've got a note here. You seem to wear many hats. You are a social entrepreneur, a localism practitioner, and a sustainable communities consultant. Grant is the founding director of DEG, that's D-E-G, that has helped over 60 community groups on energy projects, as well as a director of Community Energy Wales. And Grant, if I could ask you, please, just to give those organizations their Welsh names, because I think there's more meaning when you translate the Welsh back into English. So.
Sure. Well, I noticed you avoided using the Welsh names.
I couldn't do them justice.
So DEG is short for Datblygiad Egni Gwledig, which we never translate. It just stays as DEG. But if we were to translate it, it would be Rural Energy Developments. And we play a bit on the Egni in there, the E word, because you'll note with some of the other organisations that I'm a part of, say Ynni Teg, Ynni Llyn, Ynni Lle, Ynni Newydd, they all start with this word Ynni, which also means energy. So the E for Egni and the Y, double N-I, Ynni, also means energy. But we tend to use the Egni word more about the energy within us, if you like, and the Ynni word more about energy like the energy system, I guess. But what's fun with Welsh that doesn't work in English here is Ynni, Y-double-N-I. We'll often, so with Ynni Llyn, for example, the energy of the Llyn Peninsula, we capitalize the second N, so it's Ynni. So it has both, so we're playing with words, Ynni, as in the energy, and Ynni means in us as well. The ni is us. So it also talks about the kind of ownership of the energy and about the energy within us as well. And then also with DEG, we play along with DEG is a mutation from the word teg, meaning fair. So we also have Ynni Teg, meaning fair energy and that kind of fairness that's within us as well. It's got a kind of poetic feel about it.
No, thank you very much. Because like you say, the English doesn't translate it, but the wordplay that you have in Welsh speaks exactly to what we want to talk about in terms of the association between energy and us and a sense of fairness. So I'm glad you said it as well, because I wouldn't know what I would have said. Can you please just set the stage for us a little bit? Clearly we're focused on Wales, and Wales has been a front runner in many ways in terms of forward thinking when it introduced the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. And maybe you can just touch upon it very briefly, and what's the intended impact of this act and in terms of the ways people are working?
Well, sure. I mean, it's something for us to be very proud of in Wales, because the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, Wales 2016, was made Wales the first country in the world to have such an act. Now, when the Welsh government and devolution first started, sustainability was at the heart of Welsh government. So this act has come out of that. It took 17 years from devolution for the law to come about. But it's really important for us because it talks about how developments shouldn't be seen just in the silos like we've traditionally worked, but that we should be looking at the environmental impacts, the social impacts, community impacts, the economic impacts, of course, like we've traditionally done, but also in Wales we have the cultural linguistic impacts of developments as well. So we have these 4 areas that we should be looking at with all developments, and then it's all based on the Sustainable Development Principle as well. And it sets out very clearly, and at the minute this only applies to public sector organisations, but that doesn't stop us in the community sector from using it, because in fact this is what people in communities tell us they want. They want to see developments that look across those 4 areas. They want to see developments that have long-term planning in them. They want to see elements that are about fairness and how we in Wales can be thinking about the global impacts of our developments as well. What we do here, what impact might that have elsewhere, and thinking about how we mitigate for some of the problems associated with those rising. So the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act gives us 7 ways of working. It has 5 guidelines of exactly how it should work, and it's all very clear and very simple and worth doing a Google on and having a look at, because they've got some excellent infographics that set it out very well. Good. But for me, when we started DEG and began working with community energy organisations, the reason we started working community energy was actually because it was a perfect tool to practice what was in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It's the perfect tool to practice the sustainable development principle, and a way to ensure that developments in renewable energy that are cooperatively owned within local communities cover those 4 areas for us. Of course, they're about the environment. You are very concerned about the environment, and that's why we want renewable energy. And local people want to look after their local environment. They don't want to build hydro schemes that spoil a river or the look of a river, or affect the spawning of salmon or trout or something like that. They have an economic impact. We want the economic impact as a way to transform our local economies. They are often, as you heard from the names of the organisations that I work with, the language and culture is very key in them, and it's the way about we engage with people as well. Using the first language, through Welsh. Many of the organisations I work through do all their business just through Welsh, and I think that's often overlooked by people outside of Wales as well. And which one did I miss?
The 4th one,
the social community element. Of course, this is what it's all about. Was for us in community energy, it's about how it brings people together, how it builds some confidence within people as well when they're able to develop these projects. So the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is a guide for much of our work. It almost gives us permission to carry on doing what we do.
It's a fantastic framework that a common framework that people can look to. Now you've been involved in a huge number of projects. I think I said like over 60. And I'm wondering, if you take a step back and look at them, are there some common barriers to getting started, be it on the technical side, the capital, the volunteering? I know you've done some research in that area. What are the things that really people have to overcome initially?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I look back at some of the research we did in the early days. So DEG's just celebrated its 7th birthday in the middle of last month.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. Back in 2014, I think it was, we did some research for Gwynedd Council up here, and we were thinking about what issues communities had to overcome in developing community energy projects, and how we might be able to use some European funding that was available for us at that time to overcome them. And we discovered that we asked questions of existing community energy groups at that time were trying to develop community energy projects. We didn't have, just checking here, I don't think we had any actually producing then. There was perhaps one 4 kilowatt solar array. And then we also asked community groups that that were doing other sustainable initiatives, but not looking at community energy. And we said, what's stopping you? What's been the barriers in your project? And these kinds of questions. And three things came out very clearly for us. One of them was the complexity of energy projects. And that was seen as a barrier. Another was the expertise required to develop a community energy project. And the third one was the amount of time it takes for volunteers. Inevitably, that's what we're working with in communities, people who are volunteering their time. There's the amount of time it takes for them to develop these complex programs. Now, you'll notice there, money hasn't come into it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if you read something like the State of the Sector report, which gets produced by Community Energy Wales and Community Energy England each year, that looks at issues in community energy and the progress made in the last year, often early stage finance will come up. That hasn't been such a big problem for us because in Wales, we've had a supportive government that has run a community energy program for the entire time I've been involved in community energy. So I think that started in the early last decade, and it's gone through some different iterations and is now called, it's not been called this before, but it's now called the Welsh Government Energy Service, which makes complete sense. Yeah, of course, and they provide grants and things to people. But so that was in 2014. The surprising thing perhaps is that even now in 2021, we still come across the same issues: complexity, expertise, and the amount of time it takes for volunteers to deliver it. So what we try to do within DEG, and there's other organisations around Wales, as well as the Welsh Government Energy Service and Community Energy Wales, is provide information to community groups so that they understand the way to go. There are project management plans that help people understand the way to go through it. And we link people up either with other groups that have done something similar, so they can share the knowledge and the learning experiences they've had, or with experts. If something like an ecological survey is required, then we know who we can turn to and say, oh, why don't you go and speak to Rod over there? He can help you out. He's done lots of these kinds of things before, and the Welsh Government Energy Service should be able to fund that for you.
And it's fascinating actually how the finance side of things is not a barrier. I think if you were to list initially, it would be, and it's very encouraging that that's not, especially like you say in Wales.
It's difficult, Rick. It's not that it's, it didn't come out in the main three. Finance is always there, ticking over in the background about issues about, where do we raise the funds from for that early stage stuff, like I just mentioned, if it's a feasibility study. But the money can be found. That's what we found. And communities are resourceful and they can find them. You might think that building a £500,000 hydro project or a £1.8 million wind turbine project, you might think, oh, where's the money going to come from the local community? But we've seen time and time again that actually through community share offers and bond offers, that we can find the money for these things. That there are people, and I love the story that I heard early on from Repowering London, Agamemnon of Cerro, saying that when they worked in these blocks of flats in Bristol and places that were generally considered very impoverished, that people would turn up at their office with cash and say, here, I've got some money I'd like to invest in the solar scheme you've got here, because people want to be part of these projects. They get a return on their money as well, which is attractive to them, but really they want to see more of these sustainable projects producing clean energy. Yeah,
and I think you're touching on a core element of this, which is the wide array of benefits that come from these schemes, not just simply clean energy, which is obviously really important, but these co-benefits that are helping tie community members together.
Yeah, absolutely. In the early days, the economics drove many of the developments. Communities would say, hey, we know that if we can put some solar panels up, we'll get a good feed-in tariff this money, or build a hydro scheme. There's a good return in selling our electricity to the grid, and that return can then be spent in our communities, and that worked really well. Now that still exists, but not to the same level. It's very difficult now to build a small hydro scheme and make it pay money because the feed-in tariff's gone. It's possible, but it's difficult. So we were driven initially by the economics, I think, but very quickly we saw these co-benefits, and it goes back to the four I was talking about in the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. Really, we saw how it brings communities together. It's this great opportunity of bringing people from disparate groups together to see something develop, and how excited people were to come down to the river and see where the development was happening. I'm thinking about Bethesda and Eogwen, and how often, when they could, before COVID, when they could take people around to look at the turbine house. It's not that exciting. It's a nice little wood panel building, and you go inside and you get to see where the water spurts in, and there's a big pipe and it goes out and it makes a lot of noise, and oh, there's some nice gadgetry on the walls. It's not that exciting, but people are excited to see it, but they want to see it, and they want to be taken around and see it all. So there's that social component as well. But what we're really seeing now, and we've seen this before in other types of community enterprises, and I'm thinking about the Plunkett Foundation's work, excuse me, with community shops and community pubs. But what we're seeing in community energy now, as well, is the confidence that builds within communities and people to then take on second generation projects, whether it be another electric generation project, or what I mean by generation as in a new level of project. Sometimes they're about energy efficiency, sometimes they're about electric vehicles, sometimes they're about something completely different. They might be planning. Certainly during the first lockdown and continuing now, as we're still in lockdown in Wales, it is many community energy groups stepped up to deliver food parcels and get food out to people who were shielding or unable to go to work or didn't have the money for it. In DEG, we used our skills in raising money and raised about £7,500, which was then used in one of the wards in Carnarvon that was really feeling it. We partnered up with a local councillor, and he was able to go out and collect the food and get volunteers together, pack it up and put it out, that kind of thing. And again, in Bethesda, if I can just go back to Bethesda, they had an electric car that they were using as a community car that couldn't then be used as a community car because you couldn't have people getting in and out of it. So they started using that to deliver the food and go and collect the food. And that's turned into a model of local supply chain. So local food producers now, and the Nissan Leaf would go out and collect the food from the local producers. It all get bagged up and then sold out to people in the community. So not only was it helping people in the community who couldn't get out to the shops, for example, but it was also helping our local food suppliers as well. And all that came about because of the confidence that the community had gained through developing the hydro project.
And to your point earlier about people having the confidence to move on to second generation projects, meaning the next level, what that could be. And also tying it in with the observation that community energy projects do not have to be small necessarily. Is it true that you're starting to see new schemes that are increasingly larger scale? And in that context, can you talk about this huge project that you're working on, this 30 megawatt solar farm community project?
Yeah. I mean, it's so exciting. I mean, I can feel it just when you talk about it.
Yeah.
So one of the things we try to do with Community Energy Wales is pilot new projects and new ways of working, try and be innovative and test those out so that then communities can learn from our learning, shared around. So what we discovered with the removal of the feed-in tariff, that it was difficult for some of the smaller projects to work. And this was favouring large developers because they could develop these large scale projects where they have economies of scale, etc. So we heard about an opportunity for one in northeast Wales and decided to test out whether we could do it. Now, this has been going for a couple of years now to give you an indication of the type of volunteer time that goes into this. Ernie Newydd in a place called Bretton Hall in Flintshire, we're developing a 30 megawatt solar farm. So we're saying, well, let's see what scale we can deliver this at. Now, I probably should have to hand the number of houses a 30 megawatt solar farm can feed, but I don't have that to hand. But it is a big number, and it gets built up. In fact, on a floodplain, we had a conversation before we started the webinar here about flooding and some of the impacts we're seeing at the moment. Will be built on a floodplain, and it's okay for solar panels to be built on a floodplain. They just sit a little bit higher, the water will rise underneath them, it will be fine. And the other exciting thing about solar farm we're learning as we do this is the positives on biodiversity that we can create. So this land that's been used for farming, just for grazing for centuries, I guess, isn't that biodiverse at the moment. But we can boost that then when we put the solar farm in, and the work that goes around that as well.
And how, when you start to get to projects of this scale, how do you ensure that you're not leaving local communities behind? Because there's a tendency when things get big, it gets a little bit dehumanizing. It's no longer local and close to me. So how do you ensure there still is that community driven aspect to large scale projects?
That's a really important question, Rick. Thanks for raising it. And just as a kind of compare and contrast, and I'll stick with Bethesda just because I know it so well. We do so much work in there. Bethesda developed the hydro project that cost about £450,000, let's say £500,000 for the sake of it. And they raised all that money through a share offer, with 85% of the money coming from within their postcode region. So it's very local and able to do. Now, if we transpose that model across to Bretton Hall and a 30 megawatt solar farm that could cost £30 million, well, I don't think it would be fair to expect that we'd raise that £30 million from the postcode at Bretton Hall. I don't think we'd be successful in doing that either. And we found when we developed an ETEG, which was a £1.8 million project, was that people are willing to invest in projects, community projects that are locally based and interested in supporting local initiatives, even if they don't live in that area, because they see the value in it. But coming back to your question about how do we not leave people behind then, because if we open up Bretton Hall solar farm, if we get our planning later this year for that to happen, planning permission happens, and we start needing to raise money, and we put out a community share offer, and of course we'll need people from all around the UK to invest in that. What are the local people getting? And, why should they be supportive of this? Well, we believe that what we have to do is talk to local people and understand what it is they want. So we've started consultation processes at the moment. We don't have to do it at the moment. A large developer would do what they have to do to get their planning permission. But we want to ensure that we talk to people in the area who understand what are the issues in their lives at the moment, and how might this solar farm be able to address those issues. So we had an online consultation event recently. We have a virtual village hall on at the moment, where people can click on it. I think it's brettonhallsolar.co.uk if people want to go and have a look, and you can move around the virtual hall and look at the different display boards that we would have up if it was in a hall locally, and leave your comments and feedback. And then we had a meeting last week, I think it was, or the week before. We have a couple more coming up this week and next week as well, where local people can come in and ask us questions, and we can ask them questions, and that helps us fill out an FAQs that can go on our website for other people to see. So through this engaging with local people, we understand their issues, and then we can say, well, when we start making profit from this, these are the kind of issues we can address with that profit for you locally.
Yeah. And presumably there's also ongoing engagement in terms of, for instance, having community participation on the board or something like that.
Absolutely. So with community shares, it's one member, one vote. It doesn't matter how much you invest, you still only have one vote. So somebody who invests £500 has the same rights as somebody who invests £100,000.
Yeah.
And any of the members can then be voted to be part of the board.
That's fantastic.
So and what we found is that tends to be local people.
Yeah.
Somebody in London who might invest because they like the idea of getting 5% return these days, it doesn't necessarily want to be part of the board. come and sit up. That was a concern early on by some groups saying, well, what if we lose control of this and all of a sudden the money doesn't stay in our community? It's true, that is possible. We tend to find ways to work around that in the articles of the organisation, but it's also unlikely because actually we trust people, we have faith in people acting the right way.
Yeah. Grant, I want to try and squeeze in a couple more questions. Changing tack a little bit and recognizing that also lots of local councils have very ambitious climate action plans, encouragingly so. You know, many councils are wanting to get to net zero by 2030. How does the ambition of local authorities tie in with community energy schemes? You know, how do we, when we talk about renewable energy, we're not just talking about necessarily a green energy supplier that's remote, but we're also talking about community energy schemes as well. How are these things coming together as you see it?
You should see them. You would imagine that they'd be a perfect fit, wouldn't you? Our local democratic organisations and local councils. You thought I was talking the other way around, didn't you? So we've got these cooperatives that are democratic by their nature, and we have these councils that, of course, councillors that are voted in by us to represent our needs. Unfortunately, over time, I think that what's happened with a lot of councils is they not councillors, but I think officers within councils, that they kind of see it the other way round. But the two should work very well together, so that we could find community energy organisations who have the backing of local people economically as well, could be developing solar arrays on the roofs of local authority buildings where perhaps local authorities can't. Could be using land owned by local authorities to develop projects. And this is important because people are investing in renewable energy and community energy because they're also seeing the need to address climate change locally. It's in our communities that we see the effects of climate change. The flooding we spoke about earlier, or the extra storms that are creating erosion by the sea, or the stronger winds that are lifting roofs off or blowing over bus shelters and things like that. You know, all this is felt in our communities. Our communities want to be involved in answering that problem. So when local authorities are saying, here's our carbon reduction plan, we're going to be carbon zero by 2030, well, they shouldn't have to do that on their own, because residents in their area want to be part of it. And a good way for us to include residents in this is if local authorities and community energy groups start working together much better. And we are seeing examples of this. So don't get me wrong, I'm a little bit tainted by my own experience of my own local authority, which hasn't been as positive as I would like it to be. But in Wales, for example, we have Skis, a project in Swansea that actually grew out of the local authority there as a community energy scheme. And more recently, the EGNI co-op, EGNI.coop, have just hit £3 million they've raised, Sheriff, and they've decided to extend it to 4 million. Why wouldn't you? And as part of that, they've had a very good partnership with Newport County Council, which includes having the largest solar array on a building, I want to say in the UK, but it might be in Wales, which is on the Geraint Thomas Velodrome in Newport.
Fantastic. Grant, two quick questions to finish up, please. For people listening in Wales, this is an easy one. Where should they turn to for advice or help?
Great. You can go to Community Energy Wales website and have a look at the map on there, which will show you where all our members are based, and perhaps there's a member close to you. So you can then contact them. You're welcome to contact Community Energy Wales as well. If there's not a group close to you, what a great idea, but to start one. And the Welsh Government Energy Service can help you to do that as well. Community Energy Wales will be happy to put you in touch with people near to you who've done something similar as well. And there's Renew Wales as well, which helps community organisations meet up with other community organisations for mentoring support on climate change projects.
Fantastic. And then what about for people listening elsewhere in the UK? What do you think that we can learn? How do you think we can learn more from each other?
I think it's really important that we keep learning from each other. I'm lucky to still be part of a European project that has 5 partners, Ireland, Wales, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, Brittany. And we've learned so much by going across there when we could, going across there and learning from them and how they're doing things, and at the same time seeing how similar we all are as well. And this times when we're often put up as, you know, black and white and against each other, you're either with us or against us. Well, actually, we're all trying to do the same thing, I think, so we can learn a lot together. In the early days of starting DEG, I travelled up to Scotland many times to see the developments in Scotland, was inspired and able to bring back learning from Scotland for use in Wales. And of course, we do have conversations with our friends in England and over in Ireland and Northern Ireland as well. But I think we can do more about that to work more closely together. So the great thing about community energy for me is that we have the inter-community work and the intra-community work. So we have people within their communities coming together and working together, you know, all cooperating, but then we can also bring communities together as well, so that they can work together, and we can see that happening over a much larger area. So I'd love to see us working closely together. I see no reason why somebody in Scotland can't go to Community Energy Scotland in the same way as I've just suggested people in Wales go to Community Energy Wales, and likewise for those in England. Community Energy England provides some great resources for people too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to say a big thank you for talking to us about community energy, both of the electrical kind, as well as also the people. And not least, thank you for sharing your energy with us today.
No problems. I'm ready to go for the afternoon now.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rick.
All the best.